A single mother was beaten and cast out. Then a millionaire took off his jacket and said, "Come." A woman walks barefoot along a sunburnt highway with a sick child in her arms. No phone, no home, no one waiting at the end of the road. All she has left is her breath, and a name she will never say aloud again. But someone is watching, and someone will stop. Before we start the story, write in the comments from which part of the world you're watching today. It began with dust, not the poetic kind, not golden or gentle. This dust scraped the skin raw and filled the throat with a silence thicker than grief. The girl was burning. Clara knew the signs. Ellie's breath was too shallow, her lips chapped and beginning to split. A thin sheen of sweat had dried along her forehead hours ago, leaving behind a crust of salt and panic. They hadn't had water since morning. The plastic bottle had rolled into the ditch when the car was taken. Or rather, when she was made to leave it. Beatrice had stood there, eyes like stone, arms crossed. "You are not welcome in this house, nor near my granddaughter," she had said. No room for mourning, no chance to explain. The road shimmered ahead, endless and hostile. Somewhere behind her, vultures circled the ridge. Clara had stopped checking the time. There was only walking, one foot then another. She shifted Ellie's weight, which felt heavier with each mile. Her daughter whimpered in her sleep, if it was sleep at all. The fever was rising. The light was cruel. The desert was winning. And then the hum of tires, a low growl rolling up from behind, growing louder, closer. She turned her head, too weak to hope, too exhausted to fear. A dusty green truck slowed. The engine idled. The man didn't speak at first. He just stepped out, tall and lean, with a face the sun had carved deep lines into. He had eyes like thunderclouds and the silence of someone who knew how to wait. "You need water," he said simply. Clara nodded. He walked to the back of the truck, pulled out a jug, and handed it to her without touching her hand. She tried not to gulp, but her throat was sandpaper. Ellie barely moved as Clara wet her lips. "I can drive you somewhere," the man said finally. "Not to the hospital," Clara said instantly. They'll take her." He didn't ask why. He only said, "All right." He lifted Ellie gently, as if she were made of porcelain, and opened the passenger door for Clara. "Name's Silas," he said once, before they drove off. Then nothing more. The house stood alone, low and square, baked into the red clay ground. A clothesline flapped. 2 rocking chairs sat crookedly on a warped porch. Clara hesitated as Silas carried Ellie inside, moving through the shadows of his own home like a ghost already used to absence. The bedroom was clean, a fan whirred above the bed. Silas laid Ellie down and disappeared for a while. Clara peeled off her shoes. Blood crusted at her heel. She sat beside her daughter, listening to the labored breath of someone too small to survive all this. When Silas returned, he brought a bowl of water, a cool cloth, and an opened bottle of some kind of children's medicine. He didn't speak. Clara didn't ask where he got it. Later that evening, when Ellie was finally sleeping, Silas knocked once and left something on the table. It was a note scrawled in pencil. "If she worsens in the night, wake me. If you leave, take the road past the big tree, not the short one. Coyotes took the calf last week. No signature, no assumption she'd stay." Clara cried that night for the first time since the accident. Not because she was safe, but because someone had given her the choice to leave. In the morning, Ellie's fever broke. She was still weak, but when Silas came in with toast and jam, Ellie sat up. She took the toast without a word and gave him a quiet nod, the kind only children gave when their gratitude came from the bones. Clara watched Silas watch her daughter, and something in her began to ache differently. By the third day, Ellie laughed. Once, a small sound, like a match striking in a cave. Silas was fixing a screen door, muttering about stubborn nails, and she laughed. Clara didn't know if it was because of the way he held the hammer or the words he didn't quite say. That night, Clara found another note under her cup of tea. Children don't laugh like that if they're afraid, but nothing good lasts unchallenged. On the 5th day, the envelope arrived, postmarked from the same county she'd tried to escape, stiff paper. Her full name printed in cold ink. A notice of pending custody hearing. Beatrice was coming for Ellie, not with grief, but with lawyers. Clara sat on the porch, the letter shaking in her hands. The sun was dipping below the hills. She didn't cry this time. Silas came out and stood beside her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't have to be," he replied. "She's going to say I'm unfit, that I ran, that I didn't protect her." Her voice cracked. "Did you?" Clara hesitated. I did everything I could." Silas nodded once. "Then we fight." Clara looked at him. "Why would you help me?" He didn't look away. "Because someone should have helped you before." The first night, Clara didn't sleep, not because she was afraid of him, but because she didn't understand him. Silas didn't ask where she came from. He didn't ask why she had no bag, why her daughter clung to her like an anchor in a storm, or why she flinched every time she heard a car engine. That silence, the lack of interrogation, felt strange, like stepping into a cold stream after weeks of walking through fire. Most people asked. Even when pretending to be kind, they asked, "What happened to your husband? Where's your family? Why aren't you working?" All those questions came wrapped in smiles that smelled faintly of judgment. Silas just refilled her tea without a word. The house had 3 rooms. One he gave to Clara and Ellie. One was his own. The third was a strange sort of study. Old books, maps of weather patterns, seed catalogs pinned to the walls. There was no television, no photographs, just a radio in the kitchen tuned low to some local station that played nothing but fiddle music and dusty country ballads. On the second morning, Clara made the mistake of offering to leave. "I don't want to burden you," she said stiffly, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug. Silas, who had been slicing peaches with the concentration of a surgeon, looked up slowly. "Is she still sick?" "She's better," Clara admitted, "but still weak." "Then you're not a burden," he said, returning to the peach. End of conversation. Clara began to notice the small things. Every morning, there was something new left out for Ellie. A hand-carved whistle, a small wooden airplane, a stack of worn picture books that smelled of cedar and memory. When she asked where they came from, Silas only said, "There's a shed," as if that explained everything. Sometimes Ellie would sit on the porch while Silas worked in the fields. She didn't speak much, but she watched him. And Silas, without turning around, would say things like, "Don't pick the green ones. They bite back." Or, "That snake's harmless." Probably. Ellie would smile. A small, real smile. By the end of the week, Clara had done laundry, swept the floors, cooked one meal, burned it, and cleaned it up without a word of complaint. Silas said nothing about the charred rice or the half-melted spatula. The next morning, he left a cookbook on the kitchen table. No note. Just a red ribbon tucked at the page marked, "How Not to Burn Lentils." But silence has its limits. One evening, while Ellie was asleep, Clara found herself standing at the edge of the porch, watching Silas mend a broken fence post. "Why are you alone out here?" she asked. He didn't look up, just kept hammering. "Because I like it." That's not an answer. He paused, tapping the nail into place. "I had a brother once. He talked too much." Clara smirked, despite herself. "And you?" he asked, not turning. "My husband died 3 months ago," she said quietly. The hammer stopped. "Car accident. His mother blames me. Said I distracted him. Said I shouldn't have been in the car." She didn't realize she was trembling until her nails dug into her palm. "They said I brought death to him, that I cursed the family. They told me to leave the house or they'd call the sheriff." Now he turned. The twilight cast shadows across his face, but his voice was steady. "They threw you out with a sick child?" "She was already getting sick," Clara said. "It just got worse out there." Silas was quiet for a long time. Then, "You didn't curse anything." It wasn't a comfort. It was a fact, and for some reason, it worked better than any sympathy ever could. That night, Ellie had a nightmare. She woke screaming for her father. Clara rushed in, pulled her close, whispered every soothing thing she could remember. But Ellie's small fists kept clenching the air, searching for something she couldn't name. Silas stood at the doorway, silent. He didn't enter, didn't speak, but his presence was enough to make Clara feel less alone in the storm of it. After Ellie calmed, he left something on the floor just outside the room. It was a child's nightlight in the shape of a bear. It glowed softly when touched. Clara didn't ask where he got it. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Clara helped more, cooking, picking vegetables, mending a shirt of Silas's with a rip at the elbow. She was surprised by how steady her hands were. They talked more, but only in the in-between moments, while peeling apples, while patching up a torn screen. One evening, Silas said, "You know, you don't talk like someone who gave up." Clara shrugged. "I did give up. I just kept walking after." He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. That same night, a woman came by. A neighbor, or what passed for one in this part of the world. Middle-aged, with too much lipstick and a truck full of lemons. She looked Clara over, then Ellie, and finally said, "You the one they're talking about? From the Whitmore accident?" Clara froze. Silas stepped forward, calm but firm. "She's staying here. That's all anyone needs to know." The woman raised an eyebrow. "All right, was just being neighborly." "Then leave the lemons and go." She left them, and she went. Later, Clara stood on the porch, watching the sunset stretch out across the field like a wound slowly healing. "You don't owe me anything," she said to Silas. "I know." "Then why are you doing this?" Silas didn't answer for a long time. Then, "Because some people don't get another chance. You did. Someone ought to make sure you get to keep it." Clara didn't cry. She just breathed. For the first time in months, she let herself breathe deeply. In the distance, Ellie ran after the wooden airplane, her laughter chasing the dust. The letter arrived folded 3 times, sealed with something heavier than glue: intention. It was a Wednesday, hot and slow. Silas had driven to town early for feed and fencing wire. Clara was hanging damp laundry when the sound of gravel under tires froze her in place. A beige sedan pulled up to the gate. The driver, a young man in a collared shirt too clean for this part of the world, stepped out, walked to the fence, and held out the envelope. "Are you Mrs. Clara Whitmore?" he asked. She didn't answer. "I'm just a courier," he added quickly. "I was paid to deliver this directly. Signature not required." He set the envelope on a fence post, tipped his cap awkwardly, and left. Clara didn't touch it for a long time. She stared at it like it might catch fire. Eventually, with hands that didn't feel like hers, she picked it up and walked inside. Ellie was napping on the couch, her cheeks flushed with post-play sun. The quiet buzz of Silas's radio hummed in the kitchen. Clara sat at the table, opened the envelope, and unfolded the pages. In the matter of custody, Whitmore versus Bennett. Filed, County Court, 2nd District. Petitioner, Beatrice L. Whitmore. Respondent, Clara Bennett. The words blurred. Clara blinked, swallowed, read again. They were accusing her of emotional instability, of endangerment, of disappearance under suspicious circumstances. They had listed Ellie's fever, their days walking, and Clara's refusal to go to a hospital as evidence of neglect. A date was set. 2 weeks. She felt her breath shorten, her body folding into itself. She had no lawyer, no income, no address, technically. Silas had taken her in, not adopted her. And Beatrice? Beatrice had money, reputation, sympathy. Everything Clara didn't. The door creaked open. Silas stepped in, paused when he saw her face, then the envelope on the table. She didn't look up. "She's taking me to court. For custody." Silas sat across from her. "Beatrice?" She nodded. "Says I'm unstable, says I endangered Ellie, that I have no means to provide." Silas didn't move for a moment. Then he stood, poured 2 glasses of water, and placed one in front of her. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I don't know," Clara said, voice thin. "I don't even know what the first step is." "You breathe," he said. "Then you fight." That evening, Silas called in a favor. Clara overheard only fragments of the conversation, spoken in his usual low tone on the porch. A name came up. Anita Delgado. A lawyer. "Old friend of my mother's," he told Clara afterward. "She doesn't work custody cases anymore, but she might make an exception." Clara blinked. "You have a mother?" "Somewhere," he said dryly. "She used to live 3 counties east, has opinions on everything. We don't talk often." "She'll love me then." Silas almost smiled. "Not likely. But she trusts Anita, and that's a start." 2 days later, Anita arrived. A compact woman in her 50s, sharp eyes behind thick glasses, and a voice like gravel dipped in whiskey. She listened, didn't interrupt, took notes, asked questions that cut straight to the bone. "But where were you before the accident? How was your marriage? Did Charles ever raise his hand to you?" Clara hesitated. Anita looked up. "It matters. Not for the tabloids. For the judge." Clara nodded. He never hit me, but he didn't stop his family from hurting me." Anita didn't write that down. She didn't need to. After 2 hours, Anita stood. "You've got 2 things going for you. You love your daughter, and you're not lying. That matters more than it sounds." Clara clutched the papers still on the table. Do I have a chance? Anita gave her a look. You have more than that. You have someone willing to put his name on the line for you. Clara followed her gaze toward the porch, where Silas was sanding the edge of a doorframe. But small towns don't forget. Word got out. At the market, people whispered, the woman who let her husband die. The one living with the strange man outside town. A child caught between. One afternoon, while buying apples, Clara heard a muttered "shameless" behind her. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. Back at the house, she sat on the porch, staring at the dry field stretching into nowhere. I hate this, she whispered. Silas sat beside her. You expected better? No, she said. But I thought if I stayed quiet, if I behaved, people would let it go. They won't, but Ellie might. That's the only one who matters. Clara said nothing. Besides, he added, they only whisper when they're not brave enough to speak. The night before the court date, Ellie had another fever. Not high, just enough to scare Clara. She sat by her daughter's bed all night, holding a wet cloth to her forehead, humming old lullabies under her breath. At some point, she must have dozed off. When she woke, a note was beside her hand, written in Silas's careful print. You're not doing this alone. Underneath it was a drawing. Ellie's. 3 stick figures holding hands, one with long hair, one tall with a hat, and one small with a giant sun above her. Clara stared at it for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her bag. The courtroom was colder than Clara expected, not in temperature, but in tone. Polished wood, pale walls, and no room for grief. She sat at the long table, Anita beside her, papers neatly stacked like a shield. Across the aisle sat Beatrice Whitmore, sharp in a dark blue dress, her white hair pinned back so tightly it looked painful. Her lawyer was younger than Anita, but smoother. He smiled too easily. Ellie wasn't there. She had stayed behind with Silas, who didn't ask if Clara wanted him to come. He just said, "You won't look back. I'll be here when it's done." Clara had clung to those words for the past 2 days, like driftwood in a storm. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with tired eyes and a reputation for hating sentiment. That suited Clara just fine. She didn't have much left to offer besides facts. Beatrice was called to testify first. She stood with the poise of a woman used to being listened to. Her voice didn't tremble. She described her son's death in sterile terms: tragic, preventable, avoidable. She spoke of her concern for Ellie's well-being, of Clara's emotional volatility, and of abandonment in a time of crisis. She disappeared for over a week, Beatrice said, her voice rising slightly. We didn't know if Ellie was even alive. We had to file a missing person report. Anita didn't flinch. When it was her turn, she rose slowly and walked toward Beatrice. Mrs. Whitmore, do you recall the funeral? Anita asked. Beatrice blinked. Of course. Do you recall the moment you told my client she was responsible for your son's death? Beatrice hesitated. That's not relevant. Do you recall ordering her out of your home with a sick child and no car? I never. Anita held up a police report. A neighbor submitted a witness statement. Shall I read it aloud? Silence. No further questions, Anita said, and returned to the table. Clara was next. Her legs were shaking when she stood. The judge watched her with no expression. Mrs. Bennett, the judge said. I'm going to ask you the same thing I ask every parent in a contested custody case. Do you believe you are the best person to raise your daughter? Yes, Clara said. Why? Not do you love her? Not what have you been through? Just why? Clara looked down at her hands, then up. Because I'm still here, she said. Because I didn't give up. I made mistakes, yes. I ran when I was scared. I let people push me into silence, but I never stopped trying to keep her safe. Even when I had nothing, no money, no place to go, I carried her. She paused, and I'm still carrying her. The judge studied her. Anita asked a few questions, practical ones, living conditions, safety, school plans. Clara answered them clearly. She even smiled once. Then came the final witness. I'd like to call Silas Reed, Anita said. Clara's heart jumped. He walked in slowly, hat in his hands. Cleaner than usual, but still distinctly himself. He nodded to the judge and took the stand. Mr. Reed, how do you know the respondent? Anita asked. She was walking down Route 12, holding her daughter, middle of July heat, no shade for miles. Why did you stop? He looked at Clara, because she looked like she'd kept going even when she shouldn't have been able to. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you have a relationship with the child? Silas nodded. She built a fort out of seed bags last week, called it her castle. Let me be the guard. And you care for her? Yes, ma'am. Like she's mine. There was a pause. Anita smiled faintly. Mr. Reed, in your opinion, is Ms. Bennett fit to raise her daughter? Silas didn't hesitate. She's the strongest person I've met. She doesn't always believe that, but Ellie does. You should see the way that little girl looks at her. There was no cross-examination. Court recessed for an hour while the judge reviewed. Clara stepped outside and sat on a bench under a dying tree. Beatrice followed a moment later. Stood nearby, not speaking. Finally, Clara said, "Why are you doing this?" Beatrice didn't answer for a while. Then, "Because I lost my son." "So did I," Clara said. Beatrice's face twisted slightly. "I blamed you. I needed someone to blame." "I know. She's all I have left of him. She's all I have left too." The silence stretched. Then Beatrice sat down beside her. Not close, but not far either. "She loves you," Beatrice said quietly. "I see that. I wanted to matter to someone again." Clara turned her head. "You still can, but not like this." When they returned to the courtroom, the judge didn't drag it out. The court finds insufficient evidence to remove custody from the biological mother. Ms. Bennett has demonstrated care, stability, and intent to provide for the child. A pause. Custody remains with Ms. Bennett. It wasn't triumph Clara felt. It was something quieter, lighter, not victory, just permission to begin. Beatrice didn't speak, but as she passed Clara, she paused, reached out, and touched her hand. A silent gesture. Not forgiveness, not even reconciliation, just something human. That evening, Clara stood on the porch, Ellie in her arms. Silas leaned on the railing, eyes on the horizon. "She drew another picture," Clara said. "Said you're in it again." "Did I get a hat this time?" Clara smiled. "A crown," Silas chuckled. "She aiming for flattery?" "Maybe. Or maybe she knows what you are." He raised an eyebrow. A man who didn't run. Some things end quietly, not with fireworks or final words, but with a bowl of strawberries, a slow afternoon, and no one waiting to leave. It had been 3 weeks since the hearing. No more letters, no court dates, no whispers at the market. Or maybe they were still whispering. Clara had stopped listening. The days stretched out gently now. In the mornings, Ellie ran barefoot through the grass that had started to grow wild behind the house. She made potions from crushed mint and mud, left drawings under Clara's pillow, and began asking difficult questions about death and dreams. Clara didn't always have the answers, but she told the truth when she could. The truth was, she missed Charles. Not the man he became under his mother's watchful eye, but the boy she had met in college who carved hearts into library desks and laughed like he didn't know what the world would take from him. The truth was also, she didn't miss being Mrs. Whitmore. She didn't miss silence used as punishment, or being looked through instead of at. Out here, silence meant something else. It meant comfort, space to breathe, a room where you could hear yourself think. Silas rarely spoke unless there was something to say, but he always listened. When Clara burned the rice again, he didn't comment, just scraped the pot clean and handed her the pan with a new recipe tucked inside. When she had a nightmare and stepped outside, he joined her on the porch without asking questions, just handed her a blanket and waited until she stopped shaking. One afternoon, while Ellie napped under the kitchen table, Silas brought in a flat box wrapped in newspaper. "Found it in the shed," he said. Clara opened it slowly. Inside were packets of seeds: rosemary, mint, lavender, carrots, tomatoes, handwritten labels, a trowel with initials carved into the handle. "Mr. Your mother?" Clara asked. Silas nodded. "She used to grow everything, even when nothing should have lived in this dirt." Clara stared at the packets, then at the yard outside. "I'd like to try." They planted the next morning. Ellie insisted on helping. She wore Clara's gardening gloves, which dwarfed her hands, and stomped in the soil like she was putting out invisible fires. Silas showed her how to make space for the roots. Clara knelt in the dirt and breathed deep. It wasn't much, a few raised beds, a line of herbs by the porch. But it was theirs. Every time Clara watered the mint, she thought about how something fragile could still take root in the hardest soil, if given the right care, the right chance. Beatrice came once, unannounced. She parked her car by the gate and walked up slowly, as if unsure she'd be allowed past the edge of the property. Clara met her halfway. "I'm not here to fight," Beatrice said. "Good," Clara replied, "because we don't do that here." Beatrice looked thinner, tired in a different way than before. "I brought something for Ellie," she said, lifting a small tin box. "Photos of Charles, and some of her drawings from before." Clara took the box. "Thank you." They stood in silence. Beatrice shifted her weight. "I don't expect anything. I know. But I'd like to be part of her life. A little." Clara studied her face. The lines, the sharpness worn down not by time, but by grief. "Let's take it one step at a time," Clara said. "You can write. If she wants to write back, she will." Beatrice nodded. "That's fair." Before she left, she turned back. "You're a better mother than I gave you credit for." Clara didn't smile, but she said, "I know." One evening, as the sky turned violet, Clara stood in the kitchen, humming a lullaby. Ellie was curled up on the couch with a book about dinosaurs and had decided that the garden needed a stegosaurus. Silas leaned against the counter, sipping tea. "I've been thinking," Clara said. "That's dangerous," he muttered. She smirked. "I want to stay. For real, not just for the season." Silas didn't respond right away, just reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to her. Inside was a folded deed. Her name on it. Half the property. She stared at him. "I had Anita draw it up last week," he said. "Figured you'd come to the conclusion eventually." Clara shook her head slowly. "You gave me half your land." "No," he said. "I gave you half your land. Just took me a while to realize it." She laughed, choked on it, and pressed her hand to her mouth. "I'm not good at staying," she whispered. "You are now," he said. That night, after Ellie fell asleep, Clara stood barefoot on the porch, looking out over the garden. The wind smelled like mint and rain. Silas stepped beside her, said nothing. Clara reached for his hand. He didn't flinch, didn't tighten his grip, just held hers, steady and warm. "Do you think people like us deserve this?" she asked. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "We're not owed it, but we built it. That counts for something." Clara nodded. Below them, the garden whispered in the wind. Not with promises, not with certainty, just with the sound of something growing where nothing should have.